Hello and welcome to the Manufacturing and Engineering Podcast. Today's guest is Will Butler-Adams OBE, Chief Exec of Brompton Bicycles, a real success story and champion of innovation within British engineering and manufacturing. It's going to be great talking to him, so welcome to the show, Will. Well, welcome, Will Butler-Adams. Great to see you in the what looks like a very nice library or art gallery. So sadly, mine's a green screen.
Yeah, no, it's random paintings.
Random paintings. So we're delighted to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much. We were talking earlier, and in fact, in a previous podcast with Jürgen Meyer, and I was saying that the first time I think that I ever met you was in that infamous put on your cycling clips, two industry giants putting on their cycling helmets, unfolding a bike for a Le Mans start, and then running and cycling in front of a bank of cameras for a product launch or some initiative that was happening.
That's right, except that Jürgen is the giant and I am the tiddler. But, you know, we were both having a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it was good fun at the time. So, obviously, Chief Exec of Brompton Bicycles, you don't just start off in that position. So how did you get into engineering? What was your path to get to where you are now?
So I studied mechanical engineering at Newcastle, did it with Spanish, spent a year in Spain. And I was not your atypical engineer who was fiddling around, you know, naturally taking things apart and sort of disassembling engines and putting them back together again. I've always been very hands-on. And my problem was I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was at school. And the careers advisor told me, well, what you need to do is engineering, because then that opens more doors than it closes. I didn't even know where it was. I did maths, physics and chemistry A-level. And then found myself in a degree that was flipping hard. You know, the rest of my mates that I was living with didn't do whatsoever. And I was absolutely flat out. So it was so academically tough. But I was determined to get through it because I'd started. I had some brilliant friends, and then managed to get a half decent result. Went to work for ICE, 6 years there. Awesome, enormous amounts of responsibility. Didn't have a clue what I was doing. Running chemical plants, and if it went wrong, it would kill people, which is really makes your engineering come alive because you do not want to make mistakes. And then I thought 6 years in the borough, wasn't thinking I was going to be spending the rest of my life, you know, scuttling up ladders, you know, dealing with sort of acetylene. And I thought, right, time to do something different. I thought I was going to go and do an MBA, was studying furiously for that, and then busily met the best friend of the inventor of the Brompton on a bus, and just that I'd go and meet him. But, you know, this was a tiny company, rather than inventor in a sort of little unit in London. And I thought I'll do a couple of years, what this will be. And I knew I'd help him because the factory wasn't run efficiently. And then I'll go back to do my MBA. And that was 19 years ago. And I've been there ever since.
That's a strong story. The things that happen when you meet someone on a bus.
Correct.
But I mean, I think it's safe to say though that every time I've heard you speak, whenever we've spoken in the past, you have a passion for innovation. But your view on where innovation comes, particularly in manufacturing and engineering, is a really interesting angle and often differs in many ways from the way others describe it. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, basically, innovation is fun. I mean, you know, none of us want to sit in the same place doing the same thing year in, year out. It's deathly boring. And there's nothing like making mistakes. I'm the master of balls ups, and I, you know, permanently going and doing things wrong. I think my slight change and angle is our industry, engineering, is obsessed with innovating in the product because that's the most obvious. And don't get me wrong, that's terribly important. But today, you don't really have an engineering company. That doesn't sort of exist. We live in a global world. You need to have people who are amazing at supply chain. You need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to sell online. I mean, when I joined Brompton, I would say 80% of the staff were directly involved in making bikes. And there were 5 or 6 of us who were fiddling around with the other stuff. Now we're about 700 staff. And I would say way less than 40% of our staff, probably 30% of our staff are actually directly involved in the bike. The rest of it is looking after distribution, retail, social media, website, systems, processes, software. And you've got to just, in business, everything you do, you need to innovate. One tiny example was I took over Brompton in 2008. And most of these innovations are not mine. I'm just giving my team the freedom to do things differently rather than to stifle them. And Michelle came to me and said, we tend to have young staff and we like to do stuff. Michelle came to me and said, well, look, Will, we all work 40 hours a week. And that's 80 hours every 2 weeks. How's about, instead of working 5 days a week over 2 weeks, that's 10 days, and doing 80 hours, why don't we just do the 80 hours in 9 days? And then every other weekend is a long weekend. I went, well, that's a bloody brilliant idea. That's a cool idea, because then we can all leave London and then we can go off to the lakes and go mountain biking or do what we want to do and leave on a Thursday night, not Friday night, and have a laugh. And that's it cost us nothing. And we introduced it in 2008. Obviously, it's different for our shop floor guys because they're on shifts. As it happens, they work a 4-day shift. But for all of our indirect staff, and now I'd say about 70% of our indirect staff choose to take a 9-day fortnight. That's innovation. But that's one of thousands of things that we've done. We employed women in our shops. When you go to most bike shops, they're all men. And yet we're trying to sell bikes, women. That's half the market. And yet the whole industry was full of men. So guess what? We innovated, and we've about 50-50 in our own stores. We now have about 8 around the world. And so innovation isn't just the obvious. It's everything you do, and be prepared to fail and try something different and start from a position of making life better, more fun and more interesting.
You've sold me. that sounds amazing. And it's interesting too, isn't it? Because you, as you said there, you're bringing in, it's not controlling the vision yourself. I think when you're in leadership of a business, it's very easy, because you feel the responsibility for the company. It's very easy to suddenly take hold of it and therefore control that. So holding a light hand on the tiller has obviously made a huge difference in your business.
Well, one thing we're trying to do, I mean, we are failing on so many fronts. It's what's so frustrating and so exciting about business, because every time the business changes and grows, you're into a whole load of new challenges, and you discover you thought you were getting quite good at the last ones, and you're now back into, all funny enough, you even make the same mistakes you made 6 years ago. But one of the things we are trying to do is allow people to be independent. And inside the business, as it's got bigger, we've had to communicate how we operate, because you can't just assume people will know. So we have obviously our vision. We want to create urban freedom for happier lives. That's what we're about. But then how does that really, what do I do in my day job? And it's a bit lofty. So we bring it back down, and each department has its own philosophy. And one of the best is in our people team, and it says, Brompton does not employ egos. That's in our policy. And that is a really good starting point, because if you think you're amazing, you're not going to get people to bring their ideas, because you're better than them and you're amazing. And we have a culture where we're not amazing. I mean, we're modest, and we employ people better than us to bring their ideas into us. And our job is to allow them to flourish and to have the confidence to speak, to say when we're doing silly things and bring new ideas to the table.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, it's reminiscent of that. Say, as we all know, I'm a big rugby fan, and the All Blacks, I love their ethos with the, still the best rugby playing team in the world, whatever the rankings say, in my opinion. Yep. But I love that they have one rule when you come into the team, which is don't be a dick. And that is apparently the official one rule of the All Blacks. And I mean, obviously, a very different one to get across in an HR department. But it's exactly that. It's no egos. It's no egos. It's we're one team. And how can we all get to the end goal as the best way possible? So I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that comes into that is, and I guess in the way you're describing it, it's a kind of a diverse range of things. But skills has been an oft talked about challenge for manufacturing and engineering for a long, long time. And things have changed and things are progressing, certainly, but there's still a shortage of people coming in to fill the needs of manufacturing and engineering. And how can, in your opinion, how can we be helping generate that next, or bring in that next generation? You talked about your own challenges of going through how hard the degree was, for example.
I mean, there are,
how are we going to get people enticed in?
So from a business perspective, a little bit like we talked about there in terms of direct staff and indirect staff. I mean, engineers, qualified engineers, we probably employ about 120 qualified engineers, which is production engineers, design engineers, software engineers, across. That's still, when you're thinking about skills requirement for our industry, we need to remember that that's much, much wider than just the engineering sector. But don't get me wrong, the area in which we probably have the most challenges in finding the best staff are in engineering, and not necessarily in a particular, I mean, we do have particular challenges in particular field. Software design at the moment are giving us a few problems, but I think the main issue, and I didn't give a fantastic talk, but I was invited to give a talk at the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. And I'm not one for going backwards and coming forwards. And I gave my talk, and it was a bit of a privilege and a little bit daunting. And then somebody asked me the same question, what are we going to do? And I said, I'm standing there on the stage in the main auditorium in the M&EWeek. And I said, well, you're looking at the flipping problem. Look at you. Look at where we are. We're in a room with oak panels all the way around it, with some dusty old farts, hanging on the walls. And you lot, look at you. Basically, grey suits, moping about, 95% men. Why do you think we've got a problem? Because we are not telling people how totally awesome this career is. Then we have other industries that have a monstrously boring career, but they chuck in a few beanbags and a few t-shirts, and then the next thing wants to do that boring career. Now, I'm not proposing we do that, but we need to recognize that and do a better job at articulating it's insanely cool to be involved in a career where you can make the world a bit better. And my God, we need it. The solutions are out there. We need brains going into changing the world, and engineering does that. So we need to do a better job as an industry at communicating what a tremendously awesome career path this is. And actually, the pay now in engineering really is pretty damn good. When I left as a graduate, it was pretty bad, and you could make lots more money becoming a barrister, a lawyer, or in other sectors. That is less the case today, but we still haven't got our message across. And I will keep banging the drum that parents have an enormous part to do with this. And if the parent thinks that an engineer is the heating engineer that they've just seen in their house, or the mechanical engineer that's just changed their tyre on the side of the motorway, they're hardly going to encourage their child to want to take a career in engineering. And as an industry, we need to get off the fence and sort that out. And I've tried, and I've still failed, but I am up for, BT, sort yourself out, Dyno Rod, sort it out. All of these companies need to have pressure from government to stop calling people incorrect names, because it's buggering up our industry.
Well, a very strong message, but a passionate one. And I agree with you. I mean, I still remember when in a much wider office, when the photocopier engineer arrived to fix and replace the toner. Yep. And I was just like, wow, 5 years of intense degree to do that is a strong performance.
And I mean, I'm so passionate about it because it was so hard. And then, to become chartered, which to me is an important part of this journey, because the degree is one thing, and the degree is this sort of theoretical. I think there's some work to be done on that, but the chartered bit is important, because then you get your hands dirty and you know what it is, and that's when you are a rounded engineer and you realize what fun you can have. And but still, we haven't cracked that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a communication message that still needs to be delivered and needs to succeed. But coming on to success, Brompton has been lauded as an example of innovation. You're a brand that sells globally. It's, the most recognised in its field as a brand. But one of the challenges for lots of engineering firms when they develop a product and take it overseas and start going to export and all these different markets is actually you've put all in the hard yards over years and decades of developing and honing something and creating something fit for its market. How do you protect it when you go out? Because it's the years that go in to create that IP. How has Brompton gone about making sure that you stay safe and secure as you grow?
Well, it is a real challenge, and we face challenges globally in quite a big measure today. I think the thing that gave me a head start was that the inventor of the Brompton, Andrew Ritchie, when I joined the company, he literally was making everything. Everything. He was sort of complete genius, mild megalomaniac, and we were putting in wire. We were cropping the wire on a fly press. Then we had another jig, bent the wire one bit, move it to another jig and bend it another, and it had a 5 bend process, and out popped a bent bit of wire. The fact that there's a bloke in the Midlands with a CNC wire bending machine hadn't quite dawned on Andrew, because he wanted to do it himself because he didn't think they would do it right. He was obsessed with. He was a complete opposite engineer to me. He had control, whereas I'm happy to let other people do most things. What we did establish, I got involved in those early years, was to decide inside the company what's got our DNA in it and what doesn't. If it's got our DNA, got something in it that's special to Brompton, then we need to nurture that. We need to look after it. We need to, cradle it. And that has probably been our strongest protection of IP, because actually doing something well at volume is not easy. It has instruction, jigs, fixtures, process, inspection, all these different elements, and they come together to deliver a consistently. People might buy the product, and they might think they know how to make it, but making something as a one-off and repeating it is really quite difficult. And we're quite lucky in our industry. If you're talking about somebody handbags like Louis Vuitton, they have the same problem. Even Apple has the same problem. But neither Apple or a handbag, if it goes wrong, is going to do anyone a great deal of harm. But in our sector, in engineering, a lot of what we do is integral to living. If our bike breaks, it is not funny. Many other components and things that we make in the industry, if they break, it will have quite dire consequences. So the customer wants quality. They want to know, not just the day they buy it, but 2, 3, 4 years down the track, this thing will be there, reliable. And the difference between something that looks half decent and something that genuinely works is those processes, that detail, that repeatability. It's your brand. So really focusing on owning the bits and being really knowledgeable. And that knowledge is a barrier to entry. We, of course, have patents. We have design registration. We have copyright. We've been to court across Europe. We don't tend to bother in Asia. And we communicate the value of what we're doing and get that in the public domain, because they are your best advocates and they will encourage your customers to come to you.
Yeah, and I think that is... I'm very conscious of time, and we could keep speaking all day, I think, or I certainly could keep listening all day. But one of the things that has always struck me is the passion that you've managed to create between your customers and the bikes themselves, the brand, the product that you have created as a business. And I'm sure it's still going, because I know probably hasn't happened in the last year, but I remember you talking about the kind of the Tour de Brompton, which I thought was a fabulous way of engaging with your audience. So for those that haven't heard of it, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how that model works and what you've been doing with it, because I just think it's brilliant.
So it's a sort of another example of what we were talking about earlier, about innovation. People are obsessed with innovating in the product. But if no one knows about your product, if no one knows how brilliant you are, if you can't get your message across, you can have this amazing product doing nothing, contributing very little to society because no one knows it even exists. And the trouble is, when you're little, you have the money. You can't compete with these mega companies who've all got massive budgets. So you have to innovate. You have to do things differently. You have to be prepared to take risk. And this, again, no thanks to me. It was our Spanish distributor, Coase, who decided. He was so hacked off with everybody saying, well, yeah, okay. Is that a bike? And if it's got those funny little wheels, surely that can't go very fast. It's like, no, it's got gears, and actually, it's actually pretty efficient. It's a high pressure wheels and low rolling resistance, all this stuff. So it didn't matter what he said. People didn't get it. So he thought, right, I'm going to race the buckers. I am going to race. And so he set up this race in Spain. First year we had 60. Then we had 110. Then it got 150. Said, look, this is too big. I can't cope. You guys need to take this now. And we grew and grew, and we ended up at its height. Actually, it dipped down a little bit, but we had 12 heats around the world, male and female winners, being flown to London for the World Championships. And the London World Championships are on the Mall. The absolute epic. And we have had to stop. And we have 600 Brommies all folded on the Mall. It's a Le Mans start. You're not allowed to wear lycra. You have to wear a jacket and tie, and then you peg it past Buckingham Palace, whizzing round. And it's such fun. And people have got head cams, bum cams. There's WeChat, Twitter. People are taking photographs. And we have such fun. All our staff volunteer to help out. We have loads of families from the people who are racing, hollering and cheering. And it's a laugh. And it costs us something to put it on, but next to nothing to put it on, because our competitors all pay to take part, and we get incredible noise awareness, and it reminds people to have fun, and it reflects on our brand in a positive way.
It's absolutely brilliant. I just love it. Obviously I knew about it before, but I just think it's a fabulous way of connecting, and I think that's what's really come across in this is, and I think will be useful to so many people, is that head shift to not just think about your product. Obviously, you want your product to be the best thing, and you as a company focus wholeheartedly on making sure your product is best in market and all those good things, and reliable and consistent. The engineering is good. However, it is that head shift of how you communicate it, what is it all about, how do you get engagement with the audience, customer loyalty, and building brand and awareness when you aren't with the deepest pockets in the world, but you still are a global brand. I think it's absolutely brilliant. So, Will, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's been great fun, and look forward to following with interest as we see more and more Brompton innovation as we go through.
Many thanks indeed.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Manufacturing and Engineering Podcast. You'll be able to download the audio file of the podcast from all the usual podcast channels. Keep your eyes peeled, and there'll be many more guests coming along, as we have several already that have been produced and many more guests being lined up. So stay tuned, stay with us, and we hope that you've enjoyed the show.